sense of my sitting here with you. So I started square dancing with the other ladies, and we had too many fights, so I quit.
Oh my gosh. Where would you square dance?
I was with the Happy Squares.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that group. I believe they're still doing it.
Happy Squares, and then we danced some with the Watkinsville group and some with the Winder group, and of course went on the various conventions and all that stuff up at not Gatlinburg, whatever that dam is, Fontana, and Chattanooga, and I think we went to Nashville one time. So we went to several different places.
Well, let me begin by saying today is September the 14th, a Wednesday, and we are at the Athens Regional Library conference room, and I'm speaking with Mr. Joseph T. Meyer Jr. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Meyer. No S.
Mr. Meyer, what does the T stand for?
Thomas.
Mr. Meyer, would you tell me something of what you experienced during the World War II era?
Well, essentially, this is one small story or one occurrence. I went in 44 as a seaman apprentice in the U.S. Navy, and from there I ended up, well, to begin with, I went to the USS Wisconsin, a battle wagon, for the commissioning or pre-commissioning and the trials and what have you, to be sure that it would be acceptable by the Navy. After we had finished those trials, and at the commissioning ceremonies, or shortly after the commissioning ceremonies, I was transferred from it and then to the USS Augusta, a cruiser, also, of course, in the U.S. Navy. This happened to be somewhat of a, I suppose you would call it a diplomatic cruiser. We made several diplomatic trips, and we, quite often as a crew, we would know who might be coming aboard, depending on who our captain happened to be. It seems as though various diplomatic representatives, ambassadors, and what have you, had their own captains that they preferred, and if that captain happened to come aboard our ship as the new commander, well, we'll be with him. Anyway, make a long story short, prior to the Potsdam Conference, the president, Harry Truman, decided to, or pretty much had to, go by ship to Belgium for this Potsdam Conference. The Navy, being, I suppose, somewhat wise, decided that he would travel on the Tuscaloosa as far as the general public was concerned. However, he was aboard our ship. The Tuscaloosa carried their full complement of screening vessels and what have you, really as a decoy. We traveled with one destroyer. I'm not sure whether there was a submarine involved or not, but we traveled with one destroyer and made the trip to Europe. At that time, I was I think I had made seaman first class by then. I was involved with the navigation division as a quartermaster striker. As a consequence, we were a very small division. There were only about 22 of us in the entire division. Basically, our job is to navigate the ship. As a seaman, I was primarily a helmsman or a secondary helmsman. Quite often I was a quartermaster or assisted the quartermaster at the keeping of the logs, the hourly readings, work with the compasses, change the clocks as we went across the ocean, as we entered each new time zone. Basically what happened, we were, in a sense, put on a sub rosa or secret mission, so to speak. We were not told that Truman would be coming aboard, but one evening, who comes aboard but Mr. Truman, along with his entourage, the admirals and what have you, this doctor, I forget right now the name of the doctor, he was he was a Navy admiral, I do remember that. Right offhand, I've forgotten his name. But anyway, of course we set to sea, and it was on this trip that, being on the bridge, I was in frequent contact with Mr. Truman as he'd come up to sit in the captain's chair or sit on one of the side bridges just to look out and see what was going on. As a consequence, quite often, in fact I would suppose most days, it was, "Good morning, Mr. President, how are you doing today," etc., etc. And the one time that I really had that remains in my mind is one afternoon or one morning, I forget exactly which, I happened to be on duty. I think I was the recording quartermaster for the day. I believe I was making the entries in the log. Anyway, I decided to take a break. We weren't allowed to smoke on the bridge itself. So we had to go behind the bridge to what we call the flag bags. The flag bags are where all the signal flags are kept for the signalman to run up when needed. Has a canvas cover over it and is about 3.5, 4 feet off the floor as far as I guess the box, I would say. And then this canvas cover comes down and over it. It makes a nice little seat there if you hop up on it and put your butt down and you can rest and also smoke. Well, I happen to be sitting back there smoking my cigarette, and whom should come up with Mr. Truman. And he says, "Good morning." And I said, "Good morning, sir." He asked me how I was doing. I told him, "Real fine. I liked the Navy, fine. I had a good time. Do you mind if I sit down with you?" Now, the president asking me to sit down with me seems somewhat strange, but of course I told him no. Go ahead, sit down if you'd like. As a consequence, we sat there, I suppose, for about 15, 20 minutes, talking, with him doing most of the talking. He was a very personable man. He was a very, seemed to be a very knowledgeable man. He seemed to be more interested in me as a person rather than just making small talk. I found him rather charming, and that was my time with the President of the United States when I was a Seaman Deuce, approximately 21 years old, or Seaman First, I think, at the time. Anyway, a couple of other things that happened during the trip. One was rather interesting. In fact, I think recently I was reading, there is a book written by one of the correspondents who was on the USS Augusta at this time, and he recorded this little incident, and possibly we may differ on details, but essentially it's the same thing. Normally, the president, his entourage, the captain, the admirals, they all ate in the captain's cabin or the captain's dining room, which would be fine. I mean, that's a normal thing to do. Of course, the crew quarters, we served the entire crew, and on this particular day, or a few days before, it was announced that Mr. Truman would be eating with the crew. And we were sort of looking forward to it. It'd be kind of nice to have him sitting down there in crew's mess hall along with us, presumably eating the special food that they would bring for him, and then our regular chow. So at this particular day, we all, as usual, we line up for chow. The chow line quite often extended all the way from the chow line, from the chow hall itself, all the way back around the gun mounts. We had 8-inch guns on that. There were 2 8-inch gun mounts on the stern or in the after area of the ship, and quite often you'd sit under those to get out of the sun. These, if you can imagine, they would be probably 20 feet by 20 feet and about 4 feet off the floor, sitting on there rotating the area on which they could rotate. Anyway, we were all lined up in this long line, and Mr. Truman came back all by himself, sat down about 3 or 4 people from me, and started talking to the guys that were there, which was fine. He sits down on the deck, and along with the rest of us, and of course up the line we hear, why isn't the line moving? What the hell is going on today? What's the holdup? And we wait, and we wait, and we wait. In fact, Mr. Truman even was saying, what? Does this happen all the time? No, it doesn't happen very often. About that time, here comes a Marine guard, one of the Marines, comes running back. Mr. Truman, we've been looking all over this ship for you. We can't start the line until you come up with the captain and the admirals and what have you. Mr. Truman said, go tell the captains and the admirals and so on, if they want to eat with me, they can come back here and wait. Let's get the line moving. As it turned out, the admirals, the captains, and what have you did not come back. They sat at their special table that was set up. And as we go through the chow line, Mr. Truman's going right along with us. When it comes time for him to sit down, he doesn't go up to that special table. He sits back there at some table with the crew. After we had eaten our meal, well, I'm not absolutely sure it happened that day. Sometime in the course of our returning from Potsdam, we again had it probably was either at well, it could have been any one of the 3 meals. At least it was at a meal area. We were all in the chow hall. And Mr. Truman was sitting at the head table at this time, or at a head table, and he got up and he said he'd like to talk to us, and he seemed rather somber, seemed to be preoccupied, but he'd like to talk to us. And while we were sitting there, he tells us about the atomic bomb. Tells us that at that time, I'm not sure whether the first one had dropped or whether it had not. I can't really remember. However, my impression is that he told us it would be dropped. He didn't tell us where. He didn't tell us other than they were dropping this horrendous thing that he had no idea what the outcome would be. However, he felt that it might assist in the ending of the war. And he talked to us this way for several minutes. Then I noticed that the man actually had tears in his eyes. He actually had tears running down his face. This surprised me. I really think that that man, at that moment, felt very, very bad about what he had done or was going to do. And of course, after that, history. After that trip, I remained on the Augusta for a while. They had some various and sundry tests and what have you for the what at that time was called the V-12 program. I made my application for it. I received the recommendation of my division officer, who happened to be a Mr. Hardart. I don't remember his first name, but he was from the Horn and Hardart family, the Philadelphia, what do they call them, cafeteria style, where you put the money in and you take the, I don't know whether any of you people have ever eaten at a Horn and Hardart, but I had. Anyway, basically it was a cafeteria with all of these glass little holes all over, and you'd put your money in. If you wanted a piece of pie, you'd put your money in the pie thing, like a vending machine now, except it was a vending. Well, these were the Horn and Hardart cafeterias, and Mr. Hardart happened to be a son of one of the Hardarts that owned these cafeterias, or were in the process of it. But to get back to the main story, after I had qualified for it, they took approximately 3,000 people or men from the fleet and sent us to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. We were there for refresher courses, for tests, evaluations, medicals, and what have you, to do with the possibility of becoming or getting into what now is known as the Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps. As I say, at that time it was V-12. Well, I did have to drop back to Seaman Deuce at that time. I went from Seaman First Class to Seaman Deuce when I went out there. We were there several weeks, probably 3 or 4 months. It was on the trip over via train from Philadelphia to Coeur d'Alene that we received notice or heard on the news that Japan had been bombed, the second bomb, and that they had recapitulated. There was nothing, we had no idea what might happen to us, but anyway, we ended up at Coeur d'Alene, and every day they would have what they called the cut lists. We had bulletin boards, and each day on that bulletin board, names appeared. These were the names of the people that were sent back to the fleet. Basically what they were trying to do is weed the 3,000 people who were there. These were all enlisted men. They ranged from Seaman Deuce to Chief Petty Officers. But basically they were cutting and sending back to the fleet because they needed to get that 3,000 down to, if I remember correctly, 600 or 800. Because basically what they were going to do with those that were left, we would be sent to various universities around the country in this V-12 program. We would, of course, receive our seaman's pay, though we would drop to apprentice seaman then, which at that time I think was $50 a month or $54 a month, something like that. Of course, all of our food, our books, our uniforms, everything else was furnished. So the $54 or so was really spending money. So it wasn't a bad deal. Anyway, I got through the whole thing and fortunately was not cut and sent back to the fleet and ended up at the University of Mississippi for a year. So that was my introduction to Bilbo country, I guess it was.
Mm-hmm. Senator Bilbo.
Senator Bilbo.
And Ole Miss.
And Ole Miss. And I spent a year there. From there, the war ran down, and at the end of my school term, which would have been in either May or June, I was sent to a demobilization, and from there returned to civilian life. So this, I just thought it might be interesting if somebody happened to know some of the things that I was doing. Frankly, I was very, very lucky. The closest we ever got to a submarine, we turned and ran because we happened to be by ourselves. I had never got into any combat. I we went on several diplomatic cruises to the Caribbean area, Aruba, Trinidad. In Aruba, I know we were meeting with the Dutch people. Some others. We were primarily a somewhat special ship, I suppose. Basically, though, I had an excellent time in the Navy. I'm a plank member of the USS Wisconsin, which a plank owner is one that was aboard during the commissioning. Just as an aside, a friend of mine whom I met in 85, 84 here in the Athens area, turned out that he was a member of the decommissioning crews for the USS Wisconsin. He was from Pennsylvania and I was from all over. So it's just a coincidence that we happened to both have served on the same ship, of course, many, many years apart. Basically, that's what I wanted to tell you about.
Well, I have a bunch more questions to ask.
Okay.
And let me start by asking where you had grown up and where you had come from before you joined the service.
Well, I'm full of stories. I can tell stories no end.
Whatever you like.
I've had a good life. I've had a wonderful life. I was born in Detroit, Michigan, in the Holy Redeemer Hospital. My mother and father met on a tennis court. I don't know whether Mom picked Dad up or Dad picked Mom up. I'm not sure which. When I came along, this was in 1924, I guess I was about three and a half years old when my parents decided it was time to take a vacation. They made all their preparations. Dad bought a brand new car. He bought a brand new set of carpenter tools. Bought all this camping gear and everything. Of course, I don't remember any of this. They've told me all this over the years. And they take off. They leave Detroit, and they left me with my grandmother. I don't know which grandmother. I don't know whether it was my grandmother on my father's side or the grandmother on my mother's side. I would presume it was the grandmother on my mother's side. But anyway, they take off. They get to Toledo, Ohio, and fortunately for me, they decided to come back, take me with them. So they drove back to Detroit and left the next day. This time they had me with them. And it's a good thing, because if they hadn't come back and picked me up, I would never have known them. We didn't return to Michigan until I was 6 years old. It was for the first time. We then went back to Florida. We went back to Michigan when I was 12, and I didn't get back to Michigan again until I was in my 20s someplace. I guess I had graduated from Villanova University by that time. I think that's when we were last there. Anyway, to get back to the trip to Florida, Mother and Dad had always wanted to go to Miami, and they wanted to camp on the beach in Miami. So that's where we were headed when we left Detroit. We got as far as Jacksonville, Florida, and I guess it was in the evening or something, so they decided they would set up camp on the beach there at Jacksonville. And Jacksonville at that time had some absolutely gorgeous beaches, very, very, very wide, maybe several hundred feet. Beautiful sand dunes, open to automobiles were able to drive down on the beach. As I understand it, we camped on the beach. They were there a couple of days, and something happened to the car. I'm not absolutely sure what. But they called a service station man to come do whatever had to be done to the car. And when he was working on the car, he noticed that Father had all these carpenter's tools. So he asked him if he happened to be a carpenter. I really didn't know a hell of about carpentry. He had just bought the tools because he thought he might like to be a carpenter. Anyway, he told the guy, oh yeah, he was an expert carpenter. So the fellow asked him if he would put a bay on his filling station. And so Dad said, sure, I'll build you a bay. So he designed and built a bay onto this filling station. Well, this took him, several weeks. While he was doing this, another job comes up, and then another job, and another job. Anyway, again, to make a long story short, it was 20 years later before they finally made their trip to Miami, Florida. So I basically grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. At age, I guess 13 or possibly 14, I decided that I wanted to be a priest in the Catholic Church. So being a good altar boy and having the recommendations of the Monsignor and the assistant pastors and so on, and the good sisters, I was accepted by the Bishop of Florida, Bishop Barry at that time, and the question came up as to whether I would go to Spring Hill, the Jesuit school in New Orleans, or whether I would go to St. Bernard's, the Augustinian minor seminary in Cullman, Alabama. As it turned out, I ended up in Cullman, Alabama, where I went to school. I was there 4 years. It was in my 4th year, which would have been my 1st year of college. No, I guess actually it must have been my 2nd year of college, because I'd already completed 1 year when I decided that that wasn't what I wanted to do. My father was in the Navy. All of my school friends were all in the Navy. In fact, I don't think there was an Army person in any of the people that I knew. They were all Navy people. So I decided to quit. Had a hell of a time getting rid of my 4D classification. In fact, they had psychiatrists checking me to find out why the devil I wanted to get rid of a perfectly good 4D selective service classification, because you're absolutely, with a 4D, you can't be recruited or called for anything. You're absolutely, completely, totally exempt from everything. And when I was trying to get rid of it, the reason for trying to get rid of it, I found out I couldn't join the Navy with a 4D classification. I had to be 1A. As a consequence, I eventually ended up in getting my 1A classification, and that's how I got into the Navy. So basically, I grew up born in Michigan, grew up in Florida through the 9th grade, Villanova, or rather St. Bernard's, Cullman, Alabama, for 10th, 11th, 12th, 1st year of college, and then 1 year at the University of Mississippi, and finally 2 years at the University of Villanova, where I eventually received my degree. That's another story, but I won't tell you about that one.
Well, actually, I hope to get there. Do you recall the events of December 7th, 1941, and how you heard about them?
Yeah, very, very clearly, which I suppose most of us do. I would have been, I guess, 17 at the time. Father James, who was my physics professor and also the, he was in charge of the dorm in which I slept. He and I, on this Sunday, happened to be in the physics lab. We were working on some sort of an experiment. I think it had something to do with the Cottrell process of breaking down exhaust gases from incinerators and things. In fact, any chemical. The idea was that these cleansers would clean all of the pollutants out of the smoke before it escaped into the atmosphere. Basically, what I was working on a science fair exhibit illustrating this process. It seems as Cottrell, not absolutely sure it's called Cottrell, but it's something like that. And I don't remember whether I ever put the exhibit in the science fair or not. But basically, Father James and I were working in there. We were doing some things, and we had the radio on, and we happened to hear the announcement. Needless to say, or I don't know whether you'd say needless to say, we were somewhat shocked. Actually, it was a little too much to really absorb. We left the lab, and we rather slowly walked back to the dormitory area and met several of the priests, professors and what have you, teachers, along the way. I don't recall offhand having met any of the students. Where they were, I suppose they were out on the ball fields. That's normally where they would be on a Sunday afternoon. And the only reason I didn't happen to be out there was happened to be with Father James. I really don't remember what we talked about. Basically, the main thing I remember is that we just walked rather slowly from the physics lab back to the dorm, or the study hall areas. That's basically what we were doing.
So did it strike you that, I mean, did you recall any impression of the Japanese?
I don't recall any of that. My father went into the Navy about that time. In fact, it wasn't too long after Pearl Harbor that he went into the Navy. He had served in World War I in the Army. I suppose he found out that he didn't want to get back in the Army. But anyway, he served with the CB construction crew that the Navy had at that time, the CBs. And in fact, he was in there, I guess, 4.5 years, something like that. He was in longer than any of his kids.
Did you have brothers and sisters then?
I had 3 brothers.
Thank you.
All younger. I'm the eldest. I'm the old man of the group. Kenneth, the one next to me, did serve for a short time. Frank, the 3rd brother, never had any military service of any kind at all. And the youngest brother served in the Naval Reserves for 3 or 4 years, but never had any military service or any active duty other than the training cruises and what have you. He had some interesting trips, however, because he was an aircraft photographer. So he made one trip where they went to Europe, Greece, Africa. In 2 weeks, they covered Africa, Greece, Europe, and the States. I forget how many thousands of miles they traveled, but it was quite an interesting trip. Go ahead.
You've talked a lot about truth. How do you feel about Roosevelt? Did you have things either way?
Yep, I don't like him.
Mm-hmm.
I've never liked him. In fact, I had problems at Villanova because I didn't like him. I wrote a paper condemning his socialism, his socialistic tendencies, his sort of giveaway nature. I've never thought too much of him. I know that he's God to most people, but for me, he is the top of or at the apex of the Americas or the United States. Since his passing, we've done nothing but descend. And now, of course, we're getting into some mighty deep valleys. So maybe from that you can gather where I sit today.
So you probably had an antipathy towards him at the time, 50 years ago.
I never did like him. And I really should worship the man, because my father worked on WPA, which was part of it. I did like the CCC. I never had anything to do with it. I never knew anybody that had anything to do with it. But since I'm a believer in universal military service, not necessarily military, I should say universal government service, similar to what the Belgians and the Swiss have, and some other countries. I think the Israelis may have it. I've always been a supporter of that. That was a good program, CCC's. The problem I have with Roosevelt is he turned us around from being a nation of responsible citizens to a nation today of you owe me, give me, give me, give me. And it's just constantly, since his time, it has just ballooned. Until today, this is actually the only way you look at anything. What's in it for me? There is no altruism. There's no personal responsibility as a thing of the past. There's no such thing as an absolute good or bad. True, let's not get into philosophy. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Can I ask a favor? Could we switch sides of the room here, because you're backlit there, and I'd like to just switch around.
Okay.
And continue for a little while.
Good background. That fence. Of course, you don't pick the fence up, I wouldn't think.
No, I didn't actually get the background, but it's better that you not be backlit. I'm interested in how you came to join up, and what your basic training was like, and what the draft board was like, and how you went from 4D to 1A after all.
Okay, we're going fine. What happened is, when I left the seminary, I notified our draft board that I was available. And this is what started the problem. Well, you've got a 4D deferment. We can't change it. Well, why not? I want to go in. I'm ready to go in. Why can't I? What had happened, I had checked with the Navy before that and found out that I had to be 1A. So basically I went to the draft board to get changed from 4D to 1A. Well, somebody on the draft board must have thought that I was crazy, because I ended up in talking and being interviewed and what have you by 2 or 3 psychiatrists. Finally, after much to do and approximately 3 months or 4 months, I got my 1A. So when I got my 1A, I definitely wanted to be in the Navy. I didn't want to be in the Army. But to get into the Navy, I had to go through being selected. So instead of being drafted as such, I put myself up as being available for the next selection group. There were about 60 or 70 of us. We were sent to what then I think was called Camp Blanding in Jacksonville. We were screened, and at that time I signed up for the Navy. From there, I have no recollection whatsoever of times at this particular time of the life. But we eventually, or shortly thereafter, I was sent to Bainbridge, Maryland, for a boot camp training. I did have 1 year of college, so this was an advantage. I was able to, I guess I was an operator. I was able to get a comfy job at the boot camp. Luckily, I was fairly well educated for the majority of the people that were there. In fact, I had a little more education than most of them, and was able to be made the company clerk of my group. As a company clerk, the reason I say it was a cushy job, I didn't have to serve on mess cooking. I didn't have to do any of the drilling. In fact, I really didn't get much boot camp training. I did some of the drilling. Usually, I would work very closely with the petty officer in charge. I would keep the company records. When I say a company, there are approximately 50 people in a company. This would have been, I think, in March, April, and May, possibly. I know it was it wasn't a deep winter. It was either the late winter or very early spring that we were at Bainbridge. But the other thing that kept me as company clerk is I was able to keep track of the men as we went through the lines for our shots. Usually I'd get mine first, and I detest shots. Then I'd sit there and I'd check off each man as he went through. And the reason I always went first was because there were invariably at least 3 or 4 that would pass out when they got their shots. And I would hate to have been at the end of that line. We had about, I guess, 9 or 12 weeks, I'm not absolutely sure, of training at the boot camp. We were giving how to abandon ship. We were, if we didn't know how to swim, they at least made sure we could dog paddle with a life preserver on. We learned knots. We learned seaman terms such as the prow, the bow, the bridge, the head, or water closet is more properly called. Sometime I'll have to tell you an interesting story that happened in Canada with a head.
Oh, why not tell it
now? Let's see, what was I doing at that time? I guess I was working at the Social Security Administration's Queens, New York Payment Center. I think that might be what I was doing. Yeah, that's when I had my convertible. Okay. On a weekend, we had a long weekend there, and it was decided that a group of the guys that I knew, we'd all take a ride up to Canada from New York City. So we take off and we go up. We're going to look at the leaves because, again, this was I suppose was in October. We drove on up into Canada, and we were needed gas. So we stopped at a BP station. Of course, there's that little joke about the BP. But anyway, I get out of the car, and I walk up to the filling station attendant and ask him, "Where's the head?" He looks at me with a blank stare, and you know, the head. He still doesn't seem to know what I'm talking about. I say, "The water closet." "Oh!" And he sends me right on into the water closet. So he didn't have the foggiest of what the head was. And he sort of did like that. The head, what do you mean? But anyway, Now, where was I?
Well, I had asked you about basic training.
Right.
You had told me about nautical terms.
Yeah.
And
we were in the nautical terms, right. But anyway, they covered quite, I guess, the basic things you needed to know, such as, now I did do some marching. By that I mean they would put us, they'd march us to chow, but I always got to go first, so that was nice. I really don't remember that much about basic training, because when you get right down to it, I didn't do a lot of stuff that you did in basic training. I was primarily playing with the books. From there, after 9, 12 weeks, I forget how long it was, 3 months, I guess it was 12 weeks, I was sent to a pool for the commissioning crew for the USS Wisconsin. And for that, we were sent to Newport, Rhode Island, where we were classified. We were all seamen, of course, seaman dues. They were basically assembling a crew. That's what they were doing. And at that time, we were trying to get into whatever field of the Navy that we wanted to work in. Well, navigation held it for me, so I put in for navigation or quartermaster. And luckily, I was able to read charts. I had learned this in Florida. I had an advantage over a lot of people because I was familiar with nautical terms. I was familiar with nautical charts. I had played on boats. I had never worked on boats. And very easily I was assigned to that particular group, or the navigation division. And what we would call at that time was a quartermaster striker. So that's basically how I got aboard the USS Wisconsin.
Can you recall for me some of the popular culture of that time? Were there entertainments that you can remember for me? The movies or the radio or books or magazines?
I guess I primarily would be remembering the USOs that were very good. I never did like the Catholic USOs. I found them very, very cold. The Lutheran USOs and the Episcopalian USOs were the most friendly and the most, they made you feel at home when you came in. I never felt at home in any of the Catholic ones I went to. I thoroughly enjoyed being able to get the free tickets to shows both in Philadelphia, New York. I don't think we got any when I was in Rhode Island. But I got free tickets for shows, got free tickets for particularly the music hall in Philadelphia, probably the best music hall in the entire United States, the Academy of Music. The acoustics there are absolutely fantastic. Luckily, they didn't tear it down. I first went there, and during the time that I was in the Navy and so on, I usually got good seats. When I went to Villanova, which is in Villanova, Pennsylvania, on the main line of Philadelphia, at that time I didn't get free tickets. I had to pay for them, and I sat in the topmost balcony, but was absolutely able to hear everything. Now, I might not be able to see that well, but I was able to hear everything from up there. The shows, the Salvation Army with their free coffee and donuts, Red Cross, not so hot, I don't remember what, but I always had a problem. If I went to Red Cross, I didn't get anything. I went to Salvation Army, I always got my cup of coffee and a donut or two. The Traveler's Aid in the 30th Street Station in Philadelphia. That's another story I'll tell you sometime.
Why not now?
If you want it.
Yeah.
By this time, or I was in the Navy at that time, and as you wouldn't know, you weren't even there, getting a seat on a train was rather difficult. Basically, you had to have a reservation. If you didn't have a reservation, you took your chances. I wanted to go home for Christmas, and I had, I don't remember how many days leave, but anyway, I had some leave, and I was free. So I go to the Pennsylvania station to catch the Silver Meteor going to Jacksonville, Florida for Christmas holidays. And I guess I was probably maybe 19, 20, something like that. And I go down to the 30th Street station, put my name on the list there to be able to get a seat. Decided to go over and sit in the Traveler's Aid section. I didn't really speak to anybody there, but I happened to go sound asleep. I'm in my sailor suit, sound asleep. This nice lady comes over and wakes me up and asks me, what's the problem and so on? Why am I sleeping? I said, I'm waiting to try to get a seat to Florida. She said, well, they haven't announced any since you've been sleeping. Maybe I can help you. So anyway, she goes off. About an hour later, she comes over and she says, I got you a ticket. You're going to be able to go to Florida. Won't cost you anything. I didn't even have to pay for it. So I go to the train, and the conductor, he's real nice to me when I walk up to him with my ticket. Oh, yes, sir. Sends me back one of the stewards, or what do they call them then? Pullman stewards, or whatever they were called at that time. He takes me back, and there's a nice little room. And I'm put in this little room on Silver Meteor. Of course, I was by myself, but that was all right. It turned out that it was, I think, what they called a roomette at that time. I'm thanking my lucky stars and go to sleep. Anyway, I go to Florida, spend the Christmas at home, come on back, same deal. Roomette, all set up for me. Beautiful. So I decided that, that was a wonderful Christmas present. So I did have a lady's name. Oh, by the way, turned out the lady was a wife of one of the vice presidents for the Pennsylvania Railroad. I happened to get one of their roomettes. Wow. For that trip home. So I sent Muriel Warren a little thank you note. Thanked her very much for it and everything. I said I had looked for you in the 30th Street station 2 or 3 times. I didn't find you. I just wanted to thank you for the very fine or the wonderful Christmas you gave me. And she writes me back. She says, next time you're in Philadelphia, or if you're still in Philadelphia, because we all had APO addresses, give me a call. And she gave me her phone number. So I happened to still be in Philadelphia, so I called them up. They said, why don't you come out to our house for a weekend? Wonderful. Got nothing else to do. Why not? They lived in Berwyn, which again is on the main line of Philadelphia. We'd get off at Berwyn. They lived in, approximately 2 miles from the station in a house that was a converted schoolhouse. They had bought this school, late 1700s was when it was built, had a stage and what have you, and anyway, they had it made into a home. Beautiful suburban area. There were 2 or 3 acres to the property with a school in there. One of the things that they had to promise when they bought the school was that they would be open for the class, the reunion, the annual reunion of the class of people that went there, or various classes of people that went there. Now the school had closed in the early 1800s, so there weren't very many of them. There were maybe 15, 20 a year would show up, and of course they all died off. But this was, they had completely converted, had a beautiful place, and that's the first place I ever slept in a feather bed. They treated me just like family. It was years later that I found out maybe why they did it. It turns out that their son was approximately my age. Now, whether I resembled him or anything, I have no idea. But he was killed in the war, and he had been killed prior to her coming over, asking me when I was sleeping. So that may have had something to do with it. As a consequence, I began writing. We wrote letters back and forth. Fred Warren was a wonderful man. They had 2 pit bull, not pit bull, I guess they'd be pit bulls, the white ones. Mm-hmm. Yeah, pit bulls, I guess. Thunder and Stormy. Stormy was the male. Let's see, Stormy was male, Thunder was the female. Female was the mother of Stormy. Well, they never really took to me. And both Fred and Muriel had warned me, never make sudden moves when they're around. Stormy was much nicer than Thunder. She never did really. She'd let me pet her, but she wasn't friendly. Storm was. He'd go out and play with me out in the yard. Storm wouldn't. She never did. I'm sorry, Thunder. Stormy was the male. He was a good dog. But this leads into how I happened to go to Villanova when I left the University of Mississippi. Of course, we were out of the Navy. I'd been discharged. I put in applications to Purdue, University of Virginia at Charlottesville, I guess it is, MIT, Villanova, where else? What's the name of the university in Indiana? Purdue. Purdue. Yeah. Purdue. I was accepted by all of them. So I had to, which one am I going to go to? And we're sitting down there at the house with my mother and dad. Well, this one has this one has this one has this. Primarily was interested in civil engineering and engineering in general.
That's what you came to study?
That's what I was interested in.
I see.
But I didn't finish up there. But anyway, what it came down to was, Villanova is only 2 towns, I think it's 2 towns from Berwyn. and I know the Warrens. Why in the hell don't I go to Villanova? So that's how I happened to get to Villanova, because of them. And of course, during my 2 years at Villanova, they were very, very wonderful. And we wrote until their deaths. Okay. I guess that ends that story.
In a real way. Let me continue on along those lines then. What did you study when you were in Oxford, Mississippi? Were you in fact
there? Okay, I had a liberal arts background. I had 6 years of Latin, and 2 years of Greek. At the time that I had arrived, 5 years of Latin, I guess it was, at the time that I arrived at the University of Mississippi. The University of Mississippi, we were pretty well, since I was classified as a sophomore, we really weren't that tied down to any particular set. We were still in the general education. I remember I had sociology, I had psychology, of course math, the military training, science, physics, I think, either physics or chemistry, I forget, maybe both. We were heavy on the science side, math side. In fact, I had 2 math courses there. That basically would be it. The humanities, I think I might have had a history there.
And what did you come to study at Villanova?
Well, I went in as a civil engineer. Found out in my second half of my junior year, when I got into, what do they call it, one of the geometries. Anyway, it's the geometry where basically from a drawing, descriptive geometry, I don't know whether that's it or not, but anyway, basically, from the drawing, you can actually see a three-dimensional figure. Really and truly never succeeded in being able to convert from a two-dimensional drawing to actually seeing in my mind's eye a three-dimensional. This is not a very good, not very good for an engineer. Insofar as I had already been to 2 universities, and the third university, after many discussions and much, what do you call, I guess, career testing and what have you, had a problem there, because all these nice career tests that they give you, you know, where you indicate your likes and your dislikes and everything. Of course, the idea is you're going to end up with a spiked graph. I didn't end up with any doggone spiked graph. I ended up with sort of a nice thing. After, I don't know how much money was spent. I have no idea how many tests or what have you. The guy said, you can do anything you damn well please. All you got to do is make up your mind. So anyway, I decided to drop the engineering. Wasn't really that interested in going into business and finance. However, the Navy, since I'd forgotten to mention, when I went to Villanova, I entered the contract students, or the Navy contract student program. Basically what this is, it's for juniors and seniors in college, where they take military training or naval training, naval courses, get a basic core of courses. And at the end of it, you're commissioned as an ensign in the U.S. Navy Reserves. They pay you a stipend, furnish your uniforms, and pay for your, do they pay for the food? I think they paid for food. Of course, all the books. And luckily I got into that when I happened to get to Villanova. And I'm taking advantage of all these programs that Mr. Roosevelt started us doing. As a contract student, there were about 40 of us, I guess, maybe 50 of us veterans at Villanova who had been in many colleges, who basically really didn't have enough credits in various and sundry courses that were, or degrees that were available at Villanova. We really didn't have everything they needed. For instance, for the engineering, I was missing some of it. So the Navy made an agreement with Villanova that for these veterans, they would give a special degree called a Bachelor of Science in Naval Science. The requirement was you have 4 years, have the basic naval courses, and then you would get your degree. Now, if you wanted, for instance, if I had wanted to continue in civil engineering, I would, after I had served with whatever necessary with the Navy, I would have had to have come back to Villanova and spent an additional year to qualify for their degree. Basically, they did not dilute their degrees for the veterans, at least the ones of us that were in the Naval ROTC, contract students. They also, by the way, had that old V12 and ROTC program there, where they got everything. Strangely enough, in the year that I graduated from Villanova, and I'm not sure what year it was, I am listed in all of the sophomore classes. There's only an addendum at the end of the book that I graduated. The reason for it being that Villanova classified you by your lowest course. And I had one course that was a sophomore course. Therefore, I was called a sophomore in my senior year. I went from sophomore, or from junior 1 to senior 2, actually. And graduated. I was a sophomore when I graduated as a senior. That doesn't make sense, but that's the way Villanova classified it. But basically what happened, I did not go back to university or to Villanova to get the degree.
Well, let me ask you about the 50 years since World War II and some of the way your career has gone, as well as how you came to move to the Athens area.
I suppose after I graduated from Villanova, let's see, whom did Villanova.
What have you been working
I was trying to think of the sequence. I worked for Procter & Gamble for 4 years, traveling all over the United States, 2.5, 3 years. I worked for the Social Security Administration 25 years, retired from it. I worked for a oil company for 2.5 years as an auditor. I worked for International Harvester for about 10, 11 years as what was termed a stock supervisor. Basically what it was, I took care of I was in a district office. I took care of primarily the bids that were, for instance, for school buses, for rider fleets and what have you, where we would be given the specifications and I would come up with a truck and be able to tell how much money it was and so on. Also maintained or helped maintain the lists of the trucks that were available in the various district offices and what have you. But basically, those are the only jobs I really have ever had. Only 4 of them. They, in 67, I guess it was, is when I went with the 67 or 60, no, 62, 63. 62 or 63 was when I went with the Social Security Administration. I served 2.5 years in the Korean War. I was recalled for that as an ensign and came out as a lieutenant, senior grade.
Where did that take you during the years of the Korean conflict? Did you?
Once again.
All over the world?
No, I stayed in the Atlantic. Once again. I was on an LST as an ensign. There were only 5 officers on one of those things. I was the stores officer or supply officer, if a line officer can be a supply officer. And basically we trained the Marines on landings, what have you. We went up to Greenland. There's another bay up there, not Hudson, Goose Bay. Okay. Goose Bay up in that area on training exercises. We did a lot of training exercises on the beaches of North Carolina. Basically, that's all we did the whole time that I was aboard the LST. I left the LST and went to the Naval Air Station in Brunswick, Georgia. There, my job was assistant security officer, but most of my work was done in the running of the messes, the officers' messes. We had our BOQ, we had our open mess, our closed mess, which are the dining rooms, our bars. We had 2 bars. It'd be like running a hotel, really.
Where was that base at Brunswick? Is that what they call Glencoe?
Glencoe. Glencoe. Glynco. Glencoe. Actually, it was one of the stops for the dirigibles. The poopy bags, as we call them. P-O-O-B-Y bags. They had Lakehurst, Brunswick, Maine, I think it was. Lakehurst, Glencoe, and Key West. And the officers that were in that, not the enlisted men so much, but the officers, just shifted from base to base to base to base to base, just went around and around and around. So that was a different type of air base. We had very few planes. I think we had 1 6-seater Cessna maybe, or 2 or 3 maybe, because usually if I had to go someplace in my duties, we used a 6, or usually it was a 6-seat Cessna, I think it was, that we'd drive around in, or a little Beechcraft. They're rather small. So that's what Glencoe is. Yes. Yes, indeed. Go ahead.
Well, I'm continuing on. Did you retire at a certain point? You mentioned retiring from the Social Security Administration.
I was in the Naval Reserves, and as a consequence, you must have a minimum of 18 satisfactory years in the reserve or actives to be able to get the additional 2 years to be retired from the Naval Reserve with pay. I'm retired without pay. Mm-hmm. I had my 20 years in, but I did not have my what they call qualifying years. I only had 17 years and 7 or 8, 9 months. I had to get that other 2 or 3 months before they retire you because you haven't made your grade. In other words, you haven't been promoted. At one time, I was the 5th most senior lieutenant, senior grade in the whole United States Navy. And basically, I never made lieutenant commander. Therefore, I was put into what they call the fleet reserve or something. I don't know, but basically what it is, you're out of it without pay. I never got the pay.
How did you come to move to the Athens area?
Oh, I was working with Social Security, of course, or not of course, but I was with Social Security. In '67, some openings. At that time I was a claim representative. The next step was a field representative. There were openings that came up in 3 or 4 areas. And I like Florida, I always have liked Florida. If I had my druthers, though, I'd live in Colorado in the winter and Florida in the summer. That would be my choice. But to get back to Social Security, I was in the West Palm Beach office. Spent from 63, I guess, to 67 there. And I was putting in for these 3 or 4 places that were open. And I happened to be working with another claims rep, Marty. She was, where was she from? I forget where she was from, someplace here in Georgia. But anyway, we were working that evening. We had evening hours then. We were open from 7 to 9 for the general public. And Marty and I happened to be working when I was picking these out. She, of course, asked me what I was doing. I told her, well, I was picking out, or I was saying that I wanted to make application for these offices. And she said, well, Athens is on there. I said, I know, but Athens is outside my area. Because what I did, I took using Jacksonville as my central point, I used a 250-mile circle. And I wanted to stay within that circle. Athens is 290 miles from Jacksonville. So it was outside my interest. She said, well, why don't you go there? She says, that's the University of town. I graduated from University of Georgia. She says, it's a good town. You'll like it. You're not too far from the mountains, and you're not too far from Lake Lanier. I said, well, I'll put it in. So I put and as luck would have it, I'm chosen for it. And came up here as a field representative and stayed here until I retired in 1988 or 89, something like that. So that's how I happened to get to Georgia. Just accident.
Sounds good to me. Did you ever raise a family or marry or any of that?
I've been too busy.
It sounds as if you've shipped around on the Navy routine quite a bit.
I don't know why I'm not married. I've lost 3 engagement rings. They over a period of the years. But probably more from moving than anything else. And apparently because I couldn't make up my mind since I lost 3 engagement rings over the years. So I guess I just preferred not to be married.
You lost them, or they?
Oh, I lost
they
them.
Were.
One
they didn't work out?
One of them I did get back, and my baby brother bought it from me and used it for his wife.
Wow. Let me take you back to the years of World War II and ask whether there was anything at that time that was particularly frightening. Was there anything you were particularly afraid of during those years?
Not really, and probably there's a reason for it. I was really never in any danger. Now we were in a couple of hurricanes. We were 300 miles off course after one of them. In fact, it took us a while to find out where the hell we all were. If you say afraid, I guess you always are in a sense, but not that numbing fear. I have a friend who was in Korea, who was up on the front line, and he can tell you about the numbing fear, where you almost can't move. When I happened to be on the bridge the day that wave came over the bridge, that's somewhat undaunting. Or when the ship goes over and it sits, and you wait, is it going to come back? And of course some of them capsized. Now a cruiser is a pretty damn big ship. The odds of it being able to be capsized would be very, very small. However, we did suffer damage from these hurricanes. In fact, even on the Wisconsin, well, we didn't really suffer any storm damage. However, that's the only ship I ever felt I was going to get seasick on. And that's in the Chesapeake Bay. It's a slow battleship, doesn't do much. I never had any problems with seasickness.
Let me ask you this, since we're talking about the body. I often ask about food. I often ask about what people were eating during the years of World War II, as well as I'm able to ask some people about the Depression. Do you remember, I've heard Navy chow was good. Can you remember foods for me, or even restaurants that you might visited, ports? What were you eating in those years?
I can tell you better what I didn't eat.
Okay.
I didn't eat the powdered eggs. I did not like the powdered milk. And I did not eat that Spam, I think it was. And those are the three things I didn't eat. Everything else was fine. And we ate well in the Navy. The only time we ever had cold meals was if we happened to be in a storm and they couldn't cook. But we always had hot coffee. So the Navy was fine. I liked bookbinders in Philadelphia. I went there 2 or 3 years ago, and it's not as good as it used to be, or at least as good as I remember it. I can't remember the names of the places I went in Newport, but there were a couple of good restaurants there. I do remember one time a buddy of mine, we rented a hotel at the old Bellevue Stratford in Philadelphia. We rented a room after we'd been out for about 6 months. Had to have a bathtub, and we had to have room service. And basically what we ordered was milk and fresh fruit. And lay in the bathtub. So that was how we spent our weekend, eating fruit, drinking milk. Because I did miss the milk. I had drunk that as a kid, and I did miss the milk. We had plenty of it when I was in school, particularly at Coleman or St. Bernard's in Coleman, Alabama. They had their own dairy there, so of course we had plenty of milk. The Aruba in the Dutch West Indies, I don't remember any of the names. I would say it probably generally involved steak generally a fillet or a ribeye, something like, or a New York strip. Usually that's the kind of meal that I would order if I were going to be out. Aboard the LST, we had steaks. Aboard the Wisconsin, we didn't have that many, but occasionally we did. So we didn't eat bad. We ate rather well. The biggest problem was the fresh. You don't get fresh vegetables out at sea when you're out there at 6 months. So that would add up. I know we hit a lot of the beer joints. I know in World War II, we got particularly in South Philadelphia, we never had to buy a drink. All we had to do was walk in the bar and somebody buy us a drink. We never spent our own money. So I only have good, basically good remembrances about all of it. The same in the Korean, I rather enjoyed it. So I'm not much help to you from that standpoint.
You had a good ear for detail. While I'm on the subject, what about cigarettes? Were you smoking? Were you in charge of a ration of cigarettes or as a supply?
They were 10 cents a carton. No, $1 a carton, 10 cents a pack.
Right.
Basically, I smoked cigarettes, but the most, I never, in my entire cigarette smoking career, I never got to a full pack a day. During World War II, I bought my mother 50 cartons and took those to her, which, by the way, happened to be illegal. But I got them to her. We really started smoking at the seminary because it was absolutely forbidden. At home, it didn't make any difference anyway. If we swiped a cigarette, well, we never got caught. When we swiped a little too many, they'd wonder where the devil they had gone because both mother and dad smoked. Strangely enough, my 3 brothers don't. None of them. I'm the only one.
When did you take up a pipe?
1967. Well, what happened is, I had been smoking cigarettes. As I say, I never became a pack a day. But in sometime, maybe 60 or so, I was water skiing in the St. Johns River in Jacksonville, and apparently picked up some sort of an infection, got in my throat. And apparently it was fairly bad. But one of the things that I had to do, I couldn't talk for a month. They wouldn't allow me to talk. I was able to, but I was not to use my vocal cords. And this went on for a full month. Also, I was not to smoke. So I didn't smoke, and I didn't use my vocal cords. Very difficult to write a note for somebody because they always write a note back to you, even though you write on there, I can hear perfectly well. You don't have to write. They still write a note. Okay. Write a note back to you. So then I didn't smoke for maybe 3, 4, 5 years, something like that. Then I happened to be going to, in fact, that was probably in the 50s, because in 63, I guess it was, I'm on my way out to, I was going to Birmingham from Jacksonville to go into training for Social Security as a claims representative. And on the way out, it was sort of tiresome just driving. And I picked up some of those little cigars. And I smoked a pack of those on the way out to Birmingham. Then I started smoking occasionally a cigar. When I arrived in Athens, which would be 5, 6 years later, or thereabouts, 68, really. I ended up in moving here. I bought a house here in 67, but I moved here in 68 because I worked in New York at the Queens Payment Center for 6 months before coming here. The lady that I did the square dancing with, she didn't like cigars. So she talked me into smoking pipes. Well, I had smoked pipes some, and I had some good pipes. But she says, smoke corn cobs. You'll never have any feedback. You'll never get any globs in your throat or nothing else. So I decided to try it. Well, the first 2 or 3 pipefuls, you might as well be smoking or eating burnt corn, because that's exactly what it tastes like. And that's what it is, burnt corn. But after that, they're fine. The only problem with them, they do like this. They split after a while. And I go through one about every 6-10 months, something like that.
Actually, I'm a pipe smoker too, and I smoke corn cobs because if I lose them, I don't care.
Oh.
Whereas if I've spent more money on a briar or a Meerschaum pipe, well...
Yeah, I've got them at home. I've got the briars and the Meerschaums at home, and they just sit there. I never use them.
Let me continue with the World War II era.
Right.
And ask whether there were heroes or villains or any other characters worth reading into the record, worth talking about. You've talked to me about Truman and Roosevelt. I haven't asked you about any other commanding officers or anything like that, but were there any other enlisted men who stick out in your memory, or anybody worth
Not in World War II. We had a poor captain in the Korean, but not in World War II.
Can you tell that?
I don't remember this captain's name. He had a chip on his shoulder, though. His problem was that he had become when I say captain, this was on an LST, and the captain only needs to be a lieutenant commander, lieutenant.
Just for the moment, a landing ship transport?
Transport, yeah.
Thank you.
We carried the tanks primarily. In fact, I think it's called more landing ship tank than it is transport.
Thank you.
About 330 feet long, something like that. It's not a big ship. Flat bottom, slow. But I guess he was lieutenant commander at the time. He was, seemed to have a chip on his shoulder. He should have known, or that I had started out as an enlisted man in the World War II. Should have known it. Whether he did or not, I don't know. But he seemed to resent all 4 of us officers, because all of us happened to be college graduates. And there was nothing we could do, or at least I couldn't do, and I'm not absolutely sure the others felt that way, that he, some reason or other, just had problems with talking with us. I was never able to really talk to him that well. He was I guess, a typical sailor. His vocabulary was quite colorful. Mine has not been, not necessarily by choice. I just never got in the habit. He really didn't seem to have that much of interest in the world. There was just nothing that we had in common. That's the only one that I got along sort of, but again, I didn't. The rest of them, though, were fine. When you're talking about Hitler or Harry and so on. To tell you the truth, I'm afraid I was rather shallow. I don't think I really thought about it. I went to school with all races, many foreigners, particularly South Americans. I always enjoyed travel. My parents, as far as I know, were non-prejudicial. My father called a guest of his the hunky. He was a Polak. But it was rather interesting. This fellow, I don't know, this was before the war. My father was a union business agent in Jacksonville for the carpenters. And this fellow was from Connecticut, I think. Had come down, well, he hadn't left his family, but he was working in Jacksonville and broke his leg. There was no place for him to go. So my dad told him that if he didn't mind the 4 boys, he could come out and stay at our house. So he told us boys that this hunky, who was a Polak, was coming to stay with us. And Mr., I forget what his name was, it started with an M, Mazzacuzzi or something. We kids loved him. We had a ball with him. He was a great man. And many of our friends were Jewish. I don't know whether you'd say it's friends, but our maids, of course, were black. We were not a rich family by any means. Daddy did own his own house, but it was a converted garage. But we always had a maid, usually one that lived there. I remember more about the maids than I do about my mother.
Can you describe any of those maids?
Well, the one that I first remember was called Aunt Vining. My dad had built or brought in a small house and put it in back of our house. Had a bedroom, bathroom, and don't think it had a kitchen. Sort of like a sitting bedroom, bathroom. He'd brought that in, and my memory, she's there forever, as far as I can remember. I have no idea when she came. She was a very old lady to me at that time. I probably was about 3 or 4, so a very old lady could have been a very young lady. But anyway, she wore, I do not remember that she wore her skirts all the way down to her feet. She always wore the long skirt, even in summer. And she was with us until I was almost 8 years old. Then she left, and then I don't remember, Stella came in there someplace. She was with us for a few years, and then there was Gertrude. Now Gertrude actually lived in one of the rooms in the house. By that time, I think in fact, maybe my grandmother was using that house at that time. But anyway, for some reason, Gertrude lived in the house. And then Beatrice didn't live on the property. She would come every day. Beatrice was very young, so young that my mother got mad at me when I decided I was going to eat lunch with her one day in the kitchen. And I was told that I don't eat with the maid. So that might give you some idea. Basically, I think I was about 15 or 16. The maid was about 17 or 18. Mm-hmm. And Mom didn't like the idea.
That's exciting.
I don't think she was rather young. Gertrude was elderly lady, matronly lady. Aunt Vining used to take us on her lap and tell us stories in the evenings. She was a real fine lady. She used to give us our baths in the bathtub. And when I say bathtub, that was a wash tub about that big around, about that high, with water. I don't ever remember my mother giving them baths, but I remember Aunt Vining giving us baths. So you have sort of a strange memory.
Did your mother work, or did she simply rely on help?
She did both. She worked some. In fact, she worked the whole time my father was in the Navy. And she worked off and on, but never steady. She was always home when we were there. She ran a kindergarten in our house when I was knee-high to a grasshopper. My father built all the chairs and things. There were about 10 or 12 children. So, of course, I was there. So I started kindergarten when I was 3 or 4. And I was always lucky. Dad would read to me, Mother would read to me. The girls down the street would read to me. So I never had a problem with having somebody to read something if I wanted it read. That may be one of the reasons I enjoy reading. I don't know.
Well, we've touched on something that I don't often get to dwell on, but I want to ask the question, which is the race question, which Truman is famous for having desegregated the armed force, and between the era of World War II and the era of Korea, you may have come into contact with more colored servicemen. Am I right or wrong?
In World War II, they were all stewards. Since I was an enlisted man, no contact. In Korea, they were predominantly, this would be 52 to 54, 55, 53, 52, 53, 54, I guess. They were predominantly stewards. I don't recall either on the LST or at the base having anything other than colored or Filipino stewards. And the stewards at the base, in fact, both board ship and at the base, at the air base, both the stewards were in my division. I really didn't become aware of a racial question until I was at Villanova after World War II. I never ran into it in the South because it just wasn't there. Colored people went to our church.
Catholic church?
Yeah. There were 2 or 3 colored couples that went there from the time I started. I don't think we had any, occasionally we'd have one in school, not very often, because we didn't happen to be in the colored area. We were in the white area. But Filipinos, South Americans, Jewish, hunkies, what was it? Oh, Spics. Those are the Spanish. And we didn't have many Dagos. We had some Dagos. But we were all together. And it was, Donald was a Dago. He happened to be D'Amato. Frank Hines, I forget what he was. But anyway, there was no, at least the way I came around, there was no pejorative action to it, or no pejorative meaning to it. In fact, it almost was like Bob instead of Robert. I guess the only reason I became, when I went to university or to Villanova, was there was a black on our floor, and some of the guys resented it. And I couldn't understand why. That was really the first time I ever ran into it, to my memory. Now I may have, I guess I just wasn't that aware. It's more of an issue right now today than it was when I was growing up. We had a wonderful time. I played with the colored kids. Stella had kids. Now Aunt Vining had no younger children. She had older children. Gertrude, I don't know whether she had them or not. But it just wasn't something I knew about.
So you didn't see colored sailors during
No.
the Korean conflict either?
Other than as stewards.
Mm-hmm.
Stewards and then we had a couple of Filipinos also. In fact, some of the best stewards I ever had were Filipinos. And it was still predominantly, you have to remember, on a small ship in Virginia, at Norfolk, in fact. So I had not, and I've not been around, I've been on ships since then, but it never made it. I was never aware of the infusion of the blacks into the Navy, in that all I went on were the 2-week cruises, and as an officer. Now, an officer, you see a lot less of the enlisted men than you do as an enlisted man, of course. And you get a different view entirely. Being on one side and the other is like night and day, so to speak.
Well, we began by talking about Truman. I'd like to begin to wind up by going back to
Sure.
Mr. Truman. That must have been some conversation that you were privileged to have on board that ship. Is there anything else you can tell me about? Did you ever write any of that down?
Nope, not a thing. Those are the only 2 times when he really made an impression. Other than, of course, we saw him. He was there every day. He always said, "Hello, Mr. Truman." I don't think we ever called him anything other than President Truman or Mr. Truman. I don't remember ever hearing the name Harry. Could have been, but I don't remember it. I do know that one of his aides, and I don't know who it was, died on the trip, and we hung him up in the freezer locker until we got back to the States for the burial. Of course, you can imagine the jokes that went around the ship about that. The admiral that was his doctor was a real nice guy. But as far as Mr. Truman himself, I just found him to be an absolutely like you and I. There was absolutely no pretension to the man. None. And he was just as friendly as the world is long. And I think he cared a lot. That business of his having tears when he told us about the atomic bomb, that really made an impression. So it's hard. I just can't pick up any others. Sorry, I can't give you more.
But he asked you about your life, and did you tell him about being 40 and going to 1A, or did you give him as many details as you've given me today, or did you not have that much time in that conversation?
You want to know something? I have absolutely no remembrance whatsoever of what I said.
I imagine that must have been quite...
Absolutely nothing.
Your blood must have been racing.
I was quite surprised that he spent so much time.
And there was no Secret Service nearby?
Oh, no. See, on board ship, we didn't have that problem.
Really?
Then you got the Marine Guard. But he walked freely all over the ship. As I say, he got lost occasionally, like the luncheon deal, because he was liable to walk off. Now they kept track of him, but that's something that I have often thought about. Why can't I remember what the hell I said or what he said? The only memory I have is he was more interested in me, and I was so busy answering him. Now maybe that's a political deal.
It is a trait of a politician.
That you don't ask him questions, he asks you questions. I've never read it, but I cannot recall, no memory, other than it was about what are you doing, how's your family doing. He knew Dad was in, I know I told him Dad was in the Navy, and at that time he was in the Philippines. But when you get right down to it, many times I've thought about it, I just cannot come up with what the heck we were talking about.
Let me go from that
Sure.
to the Korean conflict, because there was a famous falling out between Truman and MacArthur. Did that register upon you? Were you serving at that time?
I was quite surprised, but I always supported the president. I thought MacArthur was wrong. Still think he was wrong. Now I could see his reasons, and he's overall his decision probably would have been right if we'd gone ahead and got it over with. But since Truman said that, and he's subject to Truman, it's just like some of these generals having to put up with Clinton. I'll have to support Clinton if he tells one of them to do something and they don't.
We're almost there.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about Eisenhower, since we've gotten into this Cold War history. Of course, Eisenhower was the commander of forces in Europe during World War II. Did you have any feeling about him one way or the other?
I would say that probably I admired his ability to coordinate and work on it. I've never thought of this until you're just asking me. I probably did that naturally. Now, as a president, I don't think too much of it.
Probably didn't vote for him?
Probably did. I voted for Truman. I voted against Kennedy. Voted for Reagan. Voted for Nixon. Still like Nixon.
Well, he's fun to talk about. And I'm winding up. And Mr. Meyer, I'd just asked him about feeling for Eisenhower.
And I said that he was a non-entity.
As president?
As president. Now, as a commander, very, very good. But as president, an absolute non-entity. Did nothing as far as I'm concerned. And I was old enough to remember, though I probably didn't worry about it.
No, it's interesting to hear people's political consciousness. Since you've been in the Athens area, we've had the Navy School over there. Have you been able to see any of those fellas doing the supply jobs that you must have done at that time? Have you had any contact with the Navy School?
There, when we say supply office, well, yes. I used to go to reserve. Okay, the Naval Reserve had a setup where you could go to a meeting, I think it was once a month, to preserve and get a credited year towards this 20-year paid retirement. Not as much as a regular, but you would get something. I went to that for several years. I'm not sure how many, but I attended it both in West Palm Beach and here in Athens. Off and on, I have had contact with the people over there. I have the husband of one of my cousins has been there 3 times since I've been here. Last time he was the executive officer. The other 2 times, let's see, he was one of the instructors the other 2 times. But what I started out to say is there's a officer normally does not do supply work. You have to be a supply officer. Okay.
You're setting me straight.
I was assigned, go ahead if you need to get that.
Yeah, it looks like something's happening there. And
okay, basically on the line officer on a very small ship where they don't have enough for a supply officer to take care of it, one of the line officers will be designated as a supply officer. Now, that may be one of 2 or more jobs. As, for instance, I was not only the supply officer on the LST, but I also was the coding officer or cryptographic officer. And I was also, what was the other thing? Something else I had to do. I guess assistant to the navigator, I guess navigation assistant. So on a small ship is the only time you run into a line officer being a supply officer. Now supply officers themselves, that's all they do. A supply officer can't be a line, but a line can be a supply.
Well, I need to...
Sure.
So thank you.